classes, so.
Right.
Oh my God, I'm sorry to hear all that. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back for our Vesper service. It's a pleasure to be joining in this evening with you. And this is the second week of our themed week on forgiveness. And last week I touched on the range of forgiveness, aspects of forgiveness, from forgiving, extending forgiveness to other people, which is very the common way that people look at it. You're extending forgiveness, but also forgiving ourselves, and then the combination of forgiving ourselves and forgiving others so that we can cut ourselves completely loose. I touched on those themes. I'm going to hit one of those a little bit more tonight. And last week, the theme of my talk was Robert Frost's poem, Mending Wall, and the line, "There's something there is that doesn't love a wall." And that was the theme of last week's particular talk. And tonight I'm focusing some of my work from this book, which has been one of the most exciting and encouraging books I've read in a long time. It was published a couple of years ago. It was a conversation that was recorded in India the last time Bishop Tutu and the Dalai Lama met. And they were very dear friends for a lot of years. And the book is called The Book of Joy, and it's a joyful read. No other way to look at it. And these two were playful. They were like a couple of kids, and this interaction that was captured by the videos that they did and turned it into this book really reflect that. So I highly recommend it as a read. It'll inspire you, as I'm sure it did me. And there's some pieces from this book that I want to bring forward on the concept of forgiveness. When you think about these two men and their lives, they lived. The Dalai Lama was still being alive, but his entire tenure as the Dalai Lama of the Tibetan Buddhists has been in exile in India. And when you look at Bishop Tutu, his formative years, most of his ministry in South Africa was under the apartheid system, and horrendous situations that he encountered. And yet these two men, both who have suffered themselves and their people that they shepherd have suffered so heavily through their whole lives. And there's no bitterness in these men. They're a true inspiration. They could be very bitter based on what they've lived through, but they don't live a life of bitterness. They live a life of joy, and they have found ways to forgive those who are in many ways would be, for most of us, considered unforgivable in terms of what has been done to people. But they don't look at it that way. And to that, they're a real role model, I think, for all of us. And I want to read you a passage in this book about a story that was relayed during their conversations. And this is about a guy in the United States, in the southern United States, a black man. His name was Anthony Ray Hinton. He spent 30 years of his life on death row in Alabama. And he was only released because a Supreme Court ruled that he was improperly imprisoned and charged, and that he could not possibly have committed a crime. When he was working in a factory when the crime was committed, and it was a lockdown factory. He couldn't even be out of the building, and there was plenty of testimony that was at work that day when the murder had happened, yet because he was a black man, they arrested him. And some of the police even stated that. He spent 30 years of his life in a 5 by 7 foot cell, and a lot of that in solitary confinement. And during his time on death row, Hinton became a counselor and friend, and not only to other inmates, but 54 of whom were put to death, but to the death row guards, many of whom begged Hinton's attorney to please get him out of there, get him released, because they really saw his innocence. When a unanimous Supreme Court ruling ordered his release, he was able to walk free. He said, "One does not know the value of freedom until one has it taken away." He told me, people run out in the rain, I run into the rain. People run out of the rain, I run into the rain. How can anything that falls from heaven not be precious? having missed the rain for so many years, I'm so grateful for every drop just to feel it on my face. How's that for a way to look at life, right? After that. He was interviewed by 60 Minutes on the CBS 60 Minutes program. And the interview asked him, how could you, whether he was angry at those who had put him in jail. He responded that he had forgiven all those people who had sent him to jail. And the interviewer was incredulous and said, but they took 30 years of your life. How can you not be angry? And his answer was pretty one-liner. If I'm angry and unforgiving, they will have taken the rest of my life as well. They would have taken the rest of my life as well. You know, when you think about folks who have just major reasons to be unforgiving in life, it kind of puts the rest of us that have a lot of freedom and a lot of opportunity and a lot of what we have in life in the light of, what are you complaining about? What are you holding grudges about? What are you holding bitterness about? What are you holding back? Giving love to folks that could use love, and what is it you need to do to get over it? Get beyond the stuff you're carrying. Because as I spoke last week, the problem with not forgiving is really that it eats us alive. It's not what somebody else did, and it's in the past anyway. It's what we do, and we carry the past forward into our present, and we project it into the future. And it eats us alive. And we pay the price for that holding on to those bitternesses. And it's just not worth it. But yet, when we look at folks like this who lived extremes, they're examples for us to say, hey, wait, time out. I can sit back and take a few moments and really evaluate some of the stuff I may be holding on to that I need to either forgive myself for or forgive others for, or both. And it's that opportunity that we all hold. Now, Bishop Tutu did a lot of work in South Africa. In his work, which I found it's astounding, but he had a 4-step process by which he taught through his church ministry how to let go of things and how to actually forgive other people. And it's pretty simple. And I thought, it's something I'd share here at Vesper service, because it's kind of fitting for this kind of environment. It's like forgiveness. Okay, when it's easy to forgive people, okay, yeah, you can do that. You do that pretty regularly. But when it's tough, how do you get through it? There's the 4 steps. The first one he says is tell your story. And he encourages people, if you have been wronged or you feel you've been wronged, that what you need to do is do one of 2 things to tell your story, so you get clear what the story is first, either write it down and don't share it with anybody, but get it out of you. Get it out of what you're carrying in your own heart. Get it on paper and get it out of you. And then the second thing is, and it could be done together, is if you have a friend who's a confidant who won't share it beyond your conversation, talk it out. Speak it. Get it off your heart, so that you can at least get it out and look at it and examine it out here versus just carrying it within your own body, which is what ends up happening. And the second step, he says, is much like the first. And he says, name the pain. Call it what it is. So if you're angry, you're angry. If you're hurt, you're hurt. But lots of times we come out sideways with our emotions, and we don't call it what it is. So if you were really hurt by somebody, then deal with it as a hurt versus deal with it as an anger or a fear or something else, or a rage or a resentment or a disgust with somebody, whatever it is that we're walking around with. If we name what it is that we're really hurt about, then we can start to work our way through that, which is also much akin to the Dalai Lama's work that they do with mindfulness, where you take on the stuff that you're carrying, where you've been injured or hurt in some way, and you work through that by owning what the feeling is and coming clear with yourself that, yeah, I'm really hurt by this, or I'm really angry, or whatever it is that you're working. But name the pain, and then ask yourself this question: when have I felt like this in my life before? Because the guarantee is it's not your first trip at this table. It's just somebody else's, the latest actor in a whole series. It's not your first time. So if you can get under the first part, you can go for the second. And it's like, okay, and then, well, when else have I felt like this before? And then the second question he poses with this is ask yourself, will this pain affect me in the future, or am I going to deal with it now? Resolve it. That's a big question, because sometimes people, we get in situations where we want to hang on to pain because maybe we hold on to the pain because we think, well, if I remember what they did, then to me or to us or whatever, then I won't forget and I won't drop my guard, and I'll be darned if they'll ever get to do that again. But there's other ways to get beyond our hurts than just resentment, retaliation, those kinds of actions. The third, and this is down the road after we really wrestled with this stuff in kind of mindfulness kind of way, is grant forgiveness. Give it. Extend it. But don't extend it until you've actually done the first couple steps, which I thought was kind of brilliant. Accept the shared humanity of those who we see as have hurt us. That they too are in pain. And we are in pain. And that we share it because we're humans. And this ties totally into the Buddhist concept of the fact that we all suffer in life. Suffering is a part of life. We're all going to have things that we suffer through. And the acceptance of that and moving through it and beyond it is crucial. Accept that we all suffer and that we can release our desire for retaliation and revenge. It's an option to hold it or to release it. And that's hard. And then in the end of that cycle, after we decide whether it's worth it to release it, extending forgiveness to another. Which brings to the fourth step. Renew or release the relationship. Either meet with the person and work through the things that you need to talk it through, or end the relationship, which is without bitterness, without the other charge that you could carry along with it emotionally, but just walk away because it's not a healthy relationship for you to be in. So sometimes that's the case. That whatever it was, that participation in that relationship that happened over those years needs to stop. And you move on and they move on in different directions in life. And because that may be a pain that you can't ever get beyond and maintain relationship. And as Tutu said, that's a perfectly legitimate choice to make as well, to move on. So it's either one or the other. Either renew the relationship, go into a renewal kind and conversation to try to resolve, or step away completely and move on. So I thought that offered some really interesting ways in which all of us could look at forgiveness in some specific ways that might help us move through some of the things that we hold on to. And that we understand that in letting go of the things that are our bitternesses in our own heart, that we can in fact make a choice clearly, because we understand what it is we're carrying, and we also understand that others are carrying hurts as well. There's a gentleman that Robert Fulghum wrote about years ago. He was a Greek citizen, lived on the Isle of Crete, and his name was Alexander Papaderos. He was a child during World War II when the German army invaded Crete. And I want to read you excerpts from Robert Fulghum's book. It Was on Fire When I Lay Down on It is the title of the book. It was his second bestseller. He tells about Papaderos. And when Papaderos was a young boy and the Nazis invaded, the villagers there were executed for daring to resist. Consequently, the people of Crete held a very special hatred in their hearts for Germans. After the war, Papaderos became an Eastern Orthodox priest. He had a vision for building an institute on the site of the massacre to promote peace between the people of Crete and the people of Germany. If they could find forgiveness and peace, he reasoned anyone could. And Papaderos succeeded in establishing that institute in his lifetime. And he became a living legend, and one summer Fulghum traveled there to Crete and for a 2-week seminar on Greek culture. And he tells this story about the tail end of that particular conference. At the last session, on the last morning, Papaderos rose from his chair at the back of the room, walked to the front of the room where he stood in the bright Greek sunlight of an open window and looked out. We followed his gaze across the bay to an iron cross marking the German cemetery. He turned and made the ritual gesture. Are there any questions? Of course, the room got quiet. These 2 weeks had generated enough questions for a lifetime. But there was only silence. No questions, he asked again. He was sweeping the room with his eyes. So Fulgham pipes up and he says, Dr. Papaderos, what's the meaning of life? There was the usual laughter, just like happened here, and people stirred to get up and go. Papaderos held up his hand and stilled the room, looked at Fulgham for a long time, asking with his eyes if Fulgham was serious, and seeing from Fulgham's eyes that he was serious, he decided to speak. He said, I'll answer your question. And taking from his wallet, out of his hip pocket, he fished out a little mirror, a little round mirror, about the size of a quarter. And what he said went like this. When I was a small child during the war, we were very poor. We lived in a remote village. And one day on the road, I found the broken pieces of a mirror a German motorcycle had wrecked in that place. I tried to find all the pieces and put them back together again, but that wasn't possible. So I kept the largest piece, this one, and I scratched it around on a stone and made it round. And I began to play with it as a toy and became fascinated by the fact that I could reflect light into dark places where the sun would never shine. In deep holes and crevices and dark closets, it became a game for me to get light into the most inaccessible places I could find. I kept that little mirror, and as I kept growing up, I would take it out in idle moments and continue the challenge of that game. And as I became a man, I grew to understand that this was not just a child's game, but a metaphor for what I would do with my life. I came to understand that I am not the light or the source of light, but light, truth, understanding, and knowledge is there. And it'll only shine in some dark places if I reflect it. I am a fragment of a mirror whose whole design and shape I do not know. Nevertheless, with what I have, I can reflect light into dark places in this world, into the dark places in the hearts of people, and change some things in their hearts. Perhaps others may see and do likewise. This is what I am about. This is the meaning of my life. And then he took that little mirror and, holding it carefully, caught the bright rays of the daylight streaming through that window and reflected it on my face. Pardon me. Much of what I experienced in the way of information about Greek culture and history that summer is gone from my memory. But in the wallet of my mind, I carry a small mirror still. Are there any questions? I love that story. It's a beautiful one. It's an inspirational story for us to conclude my talk this evening. And I want to thank you for your kind attention. And I ask you to carry forth. Thank you.